I'm a stalker. My mom has told me an alarmingly high number of creepy stories from her younger days, but this one in particular is the reason I triple check my windows and doors before bed every night. And this started when she was 23 years old, first moved out of her parents' house into a garden floor apartment back in the early 80s. She grew up in Illinois, the northern suburb of Chicago. She was working as a bank teller, 5 foot, maybe weighed 100 pounds. She was this cute young woman excited to start this new chapter in her life, and admittedly a little naive. Like any job, she became familiar with her coworkers, regular customers, and other workers who worked in the area that she would see often. She told me about a cute guy that would walk by the bank that she saw almost every shift. Her and the other bank girls would always chatter about how gorgeous he was, and one day, to my mom's delight, he came into the bank and asked her to dinner. His name was Tom. Tom offers to pick her up, she gives her address, and they agree to 7 p.m. for that upcoming Saturday. The date went fine. She described him as awkward and nervous with the lack of anything to talk about. He dropped her off a few hours later, told him thanks, but when he asked her out for a second date, she politely declined and said she saw them more as friends. She went to work on Monday, gossiped with the girls a bit on the topic. They all stopped seeing Tom walk by the bank, and my mom thought that would be the end of it. My mom forgot about him and met my dad at a local dive bar a few weeks later. Her house, the bar, and the bank were all within walking distance of each other. 2 months go by since her date with Tom, and one night she gets home from work to find her apartment had been broken into. Front door was wide open, but all they took was some underwear. Nothing else was touched besides that particular drawer. Weird, but she thinks this happens. It was a crummy lock, so her dad comes over the next day and puts deadbolts on the front and back door. The back door is actually attached to the laundry room of the building, and that laundry room is directly accessible from the backyard without a key. A week goes by, and one morning she sees her upstairs neighbor, Janet, who's a bartender in her 50s. They start talking in the main hallway, and Janet tells my mom that the night before, when she came home from work, she saw a man at my mom's front door messing with the handle. Janet heard the fumbling, and she had my mom a spare key, so the only reason she even walked downstairs at that time was because she thought my mom had been locked out. Obviously, this wasn't the case. She asked the man what he was doing, and he just ran up the stairs and darted out of the building. Mom luckily slept at my dad's that night. Nothing happens for another month. My mom tells me stories of how that month she always had a gut feeling someone was watching her, but never saw anything, so just chalked it up to her being paranoid given what had happened. Then one stormy Friday night, my mom went to bed early because she had the morning shift at the bank. Lights out by 10 p.m. and her fan on full blast. She falls asleep right away. She wakes up around 2 a.m. to the faint sound of drilling. She thought it was odd, but it only lasted a couple of minutes, so she shrugged it off, thinking maybe a neighbor was making a late night snack. She tries falling back asleep, but all of a sudden, her fan turns off and she realizes the power is out. She gets out of bed and sees that the houses across the street all still have their porch lights on. Odd. Only her building is out. She's now getting really bad vibes and is standing in her living room, where both the front and back door are. While she stays still in the complete dark, she hears banging coming from the shared laundry room area. Mom described being literally frozen, just staring at the door, when she suddenly sees the doorknob turn and a hand come in, trying to undo the safety chain. She screams and bolts it out the front door and up to Janet's door. She bangs on the door and Janet lets her in. Mom is hysterical, and Janet comforts her while her husband, Ray, goes to check everything out and asks the neighbor to call the police since they didn't have the power to do so. Police check the perimeter, see nothing, and say they'll come back in the morning once they can see what's going on in the daylight. Mom sleeps at Janet's. Next morning, they come to find that someone had drilled a hole in the back door in order to bypass the deadbolt. They had cut the phone lines and power to the building. Sawdust was literally sitting in piles in the laundry room, along with 2 peepholes that see directly into her living room and bedroom. Someone had been watching her and thought the night of the storm was the night to make his move. Creepy. She moves back home and they have zero leads on the case until Tom pops back up at the bank asking if my mom was around. She was away on a road trip with my dad for 2 weeks after the incident. The only reason he was caught was because after that, he asked the other girls at the bank if my mom had quit and moved after her break-in. Nothing was ever posted in the newspapers, so there was zero way he would have known that even occurred. Police go to interrogate him, and they find my mom's underwear along with a necklace she didn't even realize was missing. He's been in and out of prison. We're just happy he didn't get to her that night, because who knows what would have happened. To the stalker who fabricated a relationship with me for a whole year, let's never meet again. Back in 2013, I was living with my ex at the time who lived near a nice country village, and as I was in between jobs at the time, I picked up a job at a local garden center. It was casual retail work, fairly decent pay, and easygoing enough that I could take coffee breaks frequently and wear basically whatever I liked as long as I wore my work polo shirt. It was walking distance from my ex's house and full of people of all ages who were the most lovely people I've ever met. Most of the regular customers who came to the garden center were usually sweet old people who would visit the cafe because we had free teas and discounted lunches for OAPs if they had a store card. So, you have to get to know all of them, and some of them we gave nicknames. Most of them sweet like Pink Hair Lady, a badass 80-year-old grandma who wore a tasseled leather jacket and bright pink hair. Then there was Camper Van Couple, who used to drive a really cool camper van with bright orange flowers painted on it. You get the idea. With Creepy Artist Man, though, he gave most of the young girls weird vibes. He wore a straw hat, was in his late 40s, had round gold-rimmed glasses, and would wear strange graphic shirts with naked women on them. He always wore ripped jeans where his knees were always hanging out of them, which were always dirty with paint, mud, or something else. He had this weird half-smile that would never leave his face, and a kind of glare that made people uncomfortable. He would take off his glasses and clean them constantly, which kind of made you feel like he was trying to get a better look at the girls who worked there, especially the younger ones. Anyway, it was a roasting hot summer's day, and I had gratefully accepted the job of watering the hanging baskets outside, where I could avoid the humid, sweaty heat of the greenhouses. I was wearing black shorts and my red polo. With the hose in my hand and sunnies on my face, I was busy, but enjoying the solitary job at the quietest part of the garden center. Well, hello there. Out of practically nowhere, he slipped out behind some plants and looked me up and down, smiling with his weird, extremely small teeth. His eyes lingered on me for what felt like an uncomfortable few seconds, and I turned off my hose and asked him if he needed anything. He shook his head and kind of shrugged, still smirking at my legs. This was Creepy Artist Man, but I'll call him Cam for ease. Okay, sir, have a nice day. Let me know if you need anything. I turned to continue. I've never seen you here before. You're a new one. And I responded with, me? Well, I've been here for 8 months now. He says, I must have missed the memo that a beauty like you started. You have a nice tan. You look young. Thanks. I'm 21. Anyways, I have to get back to work. Nice to meet you, caseycatlady. I suddenly remember my name badge and get slightly irritated that he now knew my full name. I make a beeline for the smoking area where the tool shed was with an excuse to grab some smaller gardening gloves, and by the time I returned to the floor, he had left. As the weeks went by, he would come into the store regularly, usually mid-afternoon, coincidentally, or so I thought, around the time I started my shift. Most of the time, I was the only cashier, so I would have to serve him. He would buy the smallest, most pointless things, like floristry wire or a tiny bag of birdseed. It seemed like he would purposely make a purchase with the intention of interacting with me. He would make comments about my appearance, statements mostly like, you have your hair different today. Yesterday you had it down. "You have new glasses," or "That's a different lip color to yesterday." He would always announce my name loudly and deliberately during every interaction. I felt uncomfortable, but I was 23 and just politely shrugged it off. Around Christmas time, I was decorating the artificial trees and he cornered me in the forest of them in the back of the store. He jumped out from behind one and made me jump, to which I was kind of pissed about him doing because I dropped a glass ornament and it had smashed. He bent down also and tried to help, grabbing my wrist and telling me not to touch the glass. His grip was scarily tight and forceful, and his hands were clammy and gross. I slipped my hand out of his grip and asked him if I could help him with anything. That's when it got weird. He pulled out a leaflet from his back pocket and told me he was an artist and had a Christmas art show happening in the local church hall. He wanted me to go with him. He told me that he was a painter and he thought I would like his work. I had never indicated I was interested in art to him or anyone else for that matter, which is why I thought it was strange. I asked him if he wanted me to pin the leaflet to the local event board, and he reached out and touched my arm and said, "No, the invitation is specifically for you." He pointed his finger and jabbed it into my breast and he said, "You." So I'm standing there in a dark corner, obscured from view by artificial Christmas trees, just kind of cornered by this guy who was touching me. I cringed away and said, "I'll be busy with my boyfriend that day. Sorry," and kind of scampered off. I remember feeling really strange after that. The fact he grabbed my wrist and jabbed his finger into my chest that way. I told a few of my colleagues about it, and they all told me they would warn me next time he was in the store, so I could maybe hang out in the storeroom until he was gone. Well, that memo must have missed a few of the temporary Christmas staff, because one day I get told by one, "Your friend is asking for you at the tills." It wasn't unusual for my friends to stop by, as it was fairly popular for gifts. So, thinking it was my ex's mom or something, I head to the till, and there he is. He's holding a piece of paper. I'm uncomfortable, but he had seen me now, so I walk over and ask what he needed from me. He passed the paper over and asked me to open it. Folded up was a drawing of me with exaggerated breasts and cartoon-like eyes watering the hanging baskets in a sexual kind of position. I kind of stood there and said, "Thank you, but I can't keep it," as I thought it was inappropriate to take gifts from customers. I handed it back to him, and he kind of looked at me with this angry stare. He turned around and walked out without another word. By this point, I had enough. I knocked on my manager's door and told him about the whole scenario that just happened, and all the previous interactions I had with him over the past year. He watched the CCTV and agreed that it was so strange the way he gave me the gross picture, and told me he would talk to him if he came back. He praised me for my reaction to his advances and said I was doing the right thing, and he would try to see him off next time. The next day was a Sunday, and I was not due into work. My boss calls me and tells me that he had just received a call from HQ stating that an anonymous caller had called in to report a staff member inappropriately coming on to a customer. The staff member they had described and named was me. The caller had said that I had been inappropriate towards him at work, offered to do things with him, had led him on, and obviously promiscuous. He also said that I had been pursuing him for over a year. The jerk even described a fictitious relationship we had and ranted loudly about how I had been cheating on my boyfriend before hanging up. HQ luckily didn't believe a word, as my manager had already mentioned the guy to one of the higher-ups, but they thought it was wise to let me know about this crazy guy and suggest I report it to the police. The next day, I did just that. The officer I spoke to said he matched a description of a man who was a local pest, somebody who often harasses young girls in the local area. He was also known to stalk girls in his car and had attempted to abduct one 4 years ago. The police officers assured me they would file that report and talk to him officially, and that he was not allowed in the garden center or anywhere near me again. And if he did, I was to call the police and he would be arrested. Unfortunately, though, it never stopped him sending a ranting letter to my workplace, addressing to me, saying that he would hurt himself if I didn't take him back or receive his gifts he drew of me. Fortunately, the police saw this as unsolicited contact, and he was thankfully arrested. I met my boss's stalker, and I'm terrified. Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone who is truly crazy? Not someone who just does off-the-wall things or acts different, but genuinely insane. I have, and it terrified me. Let me back up. I'll be vague on many details for obvious reasons, but a backstory is absolutely necessary. I work for a large corporation. I actually have a couple of different bosses, but the one I formed a genuine friendship with is the one we'll call Jeff. Jeff is a very laid-back, go-with-the-flow type of guy with a great sense of humor. I also should explain that he is single with no children. Not long after I started working with the company, we became friends, and he often stops by to chat at my desk. It was about a year ago that he stopped by one morning, and I immediately knew he was not himself. He seemed distant and stressed, which is unusual for him. When I questioned what was wrong, he told me he needed to speak with me about a situation. Of course, I was immediately concerned and urged him to go on. He explained that a few years ago, long before I started at the company, another woman began working there. She wasn't in our department, but she did do work within the company that required her to interact with leadership in our area, including Jeff. Her name was Lauren. He explained his interactions with Lauren were not often, but she was polite and professional when they did need to speak. He said she worked for the company for less than a year, and then left as soon as she announced she was getting married and moving. That was that. He didn't run into her again until a couple of weeks prior when he received a friend request from her on social media. He explained he didn't think much of it and accepted it, as he was Facebook friends with many colleagues both past and present. She then messaged him later on after accepting the friend request. He said he chatted back with her initially, as she seemed to just want to catch up. He learned she had divorced and wanted to move back to our town. The conversation carried on normal until she asked if he would join her for dinner. Jeff politely declined her offer, and she seemed to take it well. Then it all went downhill from there. He stopped responding shortly after declining the dinner invitation, and within a few hours, he received erratic and insulting messages from her. Everything from calling him a wimpy bitch to saying she was the best thing he could hope for, and he blew any chance with her. He let me read more of the messages to myself. He honestly felt they were drunk texts, but still bothered him, and he blocked her. He figured that was the end of it. How very wrong he was. She then began emailing both his personal and work email, pleading for another chance, saying she was drunk and didn't mean it, saying she needed to see him, and so on. I would get to read a lot of these myself, when I would later be asked to print these off for him for evidence. The reason he told me about this on that particular day was because he had received a message request from Lauren's sister saying she needed to talk to him about Lauren and it was urgent. He accepted and responded. Her name was Beth. Beth told him something had snapped in Lauren when she went through her divorce and she became fixated on a man named Jeff. Beth explained that she tried to talk some sense into Lauren when everything fizzled out with the initial conversation with Jeff. But Lauren wasn't having it. Lauren told Beth he was her soulmate and she was going after him. All this led to Beth explaining Lauren had flown into our town and was staying at a hotel close to our company and was coming to see him at work. Jeff said he found out what Beth said to be true when he came in and found Lauren standing outside of his office. She immediately ran to him when she saw him and pulled him into an awkward hug. Jeff said he smelled alcohol on her and he immediately pulled away. She explained she was here to get her old job back and she needed to see him. She also brought him gifts that had included gift cards, snacks, and a picture of herself. Jeff refused these gifts, but she became more forceful and insisted he keep them. Jeff got away from her shortly after saying he had a meeting. He went to HR to explain the situation and how he absolutely did not want her being employed there again. He provided me with a copy of the picture she left from, and said if I saw her anywhere around the company property, to notify security. Beth later sent Jeff a picture of Lauren dressed as a man that Lauren had sent to her saying, "I'm wearing a disguise so I can watch him without him knowing it's me." Again, this was nearly a year ago. Things only escalated. Lauren made multiple trips back to our town, but would try to catch Jeff in the parking lot. He would find multiple letters on his vehicle from her. Sometimes they made no sense. She once left him 2 letters that said the exact same things, word for word, but one was in cursive and one was in print. Jeff blocked numerous email accounts only for her to make new ones. She professed her love for him, begged him to warn her, stated she made him her beneficiary if anything was to happen to her. She even sent emails that were clearly from her, but claimed to be other men that wanted her and needed him to release her so that she could love them instead. Again, I got to read all of this when printing evidence. She eventually got his personal cell phone number somehow and began calling and texting him constantly. He'd block the numbers, only for new ones to come through. This eventually ended up in court and a protective order was granted. This did bring things to a halt for a while. Jeff was finally himself again. Before, he was just a shell of his former self, and I felt horrible for him. That was until this week. On Monday morning, Jeff came by my desk and I could tell right away he was not happy. Before I could say a word, he demanded to know who placed all those letters on his desk. I was confused as I had no clue what he was talking about. I said as much and he explained there was a thick stack of letters and handmade Valentine's cards on his desk from Lauren. We later found out that they had been stuffed under his door and the housekeeper found them scattered on his office floor when she went in to clean. She didn't know what they were and just picked them up and neatly placed them on his desk. This was as troubling as it was figuring out how she got in the building in the first place. Shortly after, Jeff returned to his office to finish up some things before taking the letters to the police station. I was working away at my desk when I received a call from Jeff. Upon answering, I heard an almost panicked Jeff saying, "She's here." He explained he got a knock at his office door and opened it to find her on the other side, grinning at him. He said he told her he was calling the police and slammed the door in her face and locked it. He called police and then called me to inform them she had been there and the police were on the way. I, foolishly, assumed she would bail after he told her he was calling the cops. I got up from my desk and headed down the hall to Jeff's office. I wanted to check on him and wait for the police with him. I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw her. She was sitting on the floor outside his office door, humming to herself. She slowly turned her head to look at me. I can't explain the knot that formed in my stomach as our eyes locked. She looked a lot like the picture Jeff had previously given me, but her eyes were different. They were dark. There wasn't that lively spark that you often see in people's eyes. It was like they were hollow, void of any normalcy. Her lips slightly twitched up to a smile. She then slowly turned her head backwards towards Jeff's door, and she resumed humming. I absolutely darted back to my desk. Thankfully, the police arrived shortly after. She didn't put up a fight. She calmly allowed them to arrest her and walked away willingly with them. Still humming, they told us after. She's still in jail for violating the protective order. Jeff and myself are both still very shaken by the experience. I'll never forget that look in her eyes, staring into an abyss of true insanity.